you everyone for coming on Saturday morning. And thank you, Mr. Ravi and Varun and Mr. Vimesh for introducing me. Uh, that video, as we just saw, showed the power of technology shifts and how it couples to adoption rates and financing. And this is something which we feel will play out in the renewable energy transition. And I will, over the next about 20-ish minutes, take you through that. We should remember that we live in an era of absolute human well being. Never before in the history of our species have so many people existed on the planet, and so many people having been fed and clothed and housed in comfort. Much of this comes from the consumption of uh, energy resources, particularly fossil fueled, as Ravi was alluding to a few moments ago. From the prehistory times to the industrial era and to the present, the consumption of ever denser sources of energy, particularly hydrocarbons, has expanded, and with it has expanded emissions. It is only recently that we have been able to figure out the computational methodologies to piece together all the data on the world's climate, and our track record has been pretty bad. Significant global warming has been occurring, a lot of it accelerating over the last 2 decades, and now the evidence is unequivocal. These changes created by human activity, therefore the term Anthropocene, has led to violent changes in the climate, forest fires in various parts of the world, unprecedented and violent storms, flooding, and droughts. Even though the new forms of energy are more efficient more than anything else, it is time for us as members of a species living on this planet to take action before we are completely wiped out by climate change also. This is not an alarmist statement, but merely a reflection of reality because we are now entering uncharted territory. Therefore, it is safe to say that the energy transition is a complete change in the way we relate to all aspects of energy generation, distribution, and consumption. It will change our relationship with resources, how the industry would change to largely a capex driven, front cost loaded industry, how the supply side would become more variable, and how information technology will help us get on top of the supply. How do we transport the new forms of energy, particularly which are less energy dense, and how do we store them? This is what will occupy a significant part of the capex, and the technologies will arise to support each of these. Just to illustrate, the cumulative emissions reduction going out to 2050, as Ravi was alluding to, would largely come from electrification and large adoption of solar and wind as renewable sources of energy. Efficiency increments will also drive a substantial emission reduction, and biofuels, carbon capture, and hydrogen will cover areas which are hard to abate, particularly long range aviation, steel, fertilizer, and cement. The supply chains would have low emission synthetic hydrocarbon fuels, low emission hydrogen, and low emission electricity as their key pillars, enabling fuel cell vehicles, heat pumps, electric vehicles, and technology supply chains to manifest themselves around the world. We expect that these will change the way we view the supply chains of energy and its use forever. And this is not just talk. The viability of any technology, just as in Hindu mythology, we have the holy trinity of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. In the same way, for energy technologies, we have the holy trinity of installed cost, capacity factor, and levelized cost. On the right, the table shows that for solar and wind, both on and offshore, total installed costs have dropped. Solar, for instance, has dropped by 83%. For solar, the capacity factors have increased by 23%, all in a span of 10 to 12 years, most of it driven by improvements in photovoltaic efficiencies, while the levelized cost of electricity has dropped by a factor of nearly 90%. And it is not just solar, as we can see on the left, it is wind, it is also biofuels, Various renewable sources of energy now have levelized costs which are below the fossil fuel cost range, which is the gray box on the screen here, or they are also now much cheaper in various parts of the world than they've ever been. Renewable energies therefore give access to a huge amount of energy for a large number of people without having them to pay large quantities of their wealth to other countries as economic rents. And the numbers are bearing it out. As the number of renewable energy projects have grown, cost competitiveness has improved. Seen on the left, one can see that from 2010 to 2022, over 187 gigawatts of renewable capacities have been added in OECD countries, most of it in solar photovoltaic. And the number of projects that need subsidy supports has reduced considerably. In terms of levelized cost, solar is probably the cheapest form of electricity energy ever available in the history of humanity. And this has led to real world savings accumulating to nearly $100 billion from 2010 to present. This is sizable. And this represents a changing of the guard. This represents the age of carbon giving way to the age of renewables. Fossil fuels giving way to electricity, hydrogen, ammonia, or biofuels. Geographically concentrated resources of energy giving way to abundant energy resources. A finite exhaustible commodity flow giving way to infinite renewable energy, where the only bottlenecks would be the technology learning rate curves. And unlike the past, where economic rents would concentrate with oligarchies in resource rich countries, there would be no super profits in this era. It is more a flow based system. Thomas Kuhn has said, rather famously in 2012, that when paradigms change, the world changes with them. The change of transportation that is shown in that video was one such example. We feel renewable energies and the growth of the renewable energy variable flow based grids is the next such paradigm change. Of course, there is no point in talking of all of this if it is not going to be cost effective. And we see that a combination of improved efficiencies and the reason to not give economic rents to oligarchs means that overall it is not as expensive as it looks, other than a few sectors like long range aviation, where we still don't have a clear substitute for fossil fuels. In every other area, the increase in cost for the renewable energy transition is very manageable. Which then brings me to solar PV, capturing the power of the sun. Inevitably, this is a sector where we are going to focus our attention because this has been the bulwark, the rational axle around which the entire renewable energy narrative has been built. One of the greatest advantages of photovoltaics is that at least the first generation of it were largely silicon based, and a large part of the semiconductor expertise in handling silicon, manipulating it in complicated ways, creating structures on silicon, building up heterostructures through photoresist etching, etc., were already matured. As a result, cell efficiencies have exponentially increased. Silicon photovoltaic cells, which in the 1960s were hardly in 1 to 2% efficiency ranges, are now pushing the Shockley-Quasar limit at about 26%. The second half of the second decade of the 21st century has also seen levelized costs of electricity of photovoltaics dropping below the levelized cost of fossil fuels across many countries in the world, as shown on the right side of the slide. The era of renewable generation has truly now hit capital and cost viability as well. Since the heart of any of these is the solar photovoltaic, I thought it would be useful to speak for a moment on this. The solar photovoltaic essentially is a solar cell. It is a semiconductor device which harnesses electrons from photons. A photon is essentially a particle of light. So when light is incident on the solar panel, it creates electrons and holes. An electron, the dark dot represented in the left top image, and the hole is a region where, which is the red dot or the red ball, is a region where there are low number of electrons or a smaller number of electrons. Nature normally doesn't like separation of charges, so normally these two entities would recombine very rapidly in keeping charge neutrality. The beauty of a solar cell is that it is able to extract this electron, drive it through an external circuit through a load where it can be used to run machines, create electricity, etc., and comes back around to recombine with the hole on the other side. So solar photovoltaics rely on creating as many electron hole pairs as possible from the incoming light and then harnessing the electrons as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible to prevent them from recombining. So a combination of removing electrons rapidly and preventing wastage of photons has driven solar panel efficiencies from about a single digit 1%, 2% in the 1940s and 50s when the technology was in the lab to nearly 30% at present. This slide is a little technical and a little cluttered, so I request you to indulge me here. Over the time, the drive to increase the utility of the light coming in and minimizing the charge carrier losses has been a virtuous cycle, one driving the other. Now, whenever one reads photovoltaic literature, one comes across terms like perk, bifacial, pearl, etc. I will attempt to disambiguate some of this area. Perk or passivated emitter rear contact is essentially a design which prevents leakage of light. So it maximizes the utilization of photons and reduces wastage of photons. Having two layers, one front and one at the back, the bifacial allows harvesting of diffuse light, further increasing efficiencies. If a further passivation layer is added, then recombination losses are minimized, driving efficiencies closer to 25%. Bifacialization would again drive it further to nearly 27%. One can have heterostructures where there can be an amorphous passivation layer introduced, which will further reduce the recombination losses of charge carriers. All these techniques, and now the most important ones which are coming into mass production, which is the TOPCon or tunnel oxide passivated contact, further improve efficiency by increasing the amount of light available and reducing charge carrier combinations. The figures shown here show kind of complicated semiconductor layered structures that are important for these devices. And this is only possible because of the maturity already built up in the semiconductor value chain that this technology is based off from. So broadly, in terms of value chain, we have polysilicon, ingots, wafers. From wafers, cells are manufactured. Cells are then assembled into modules, packaged with an inverter to become a PV system. Over the period of time from 2010 to present, cell sizes have increased significantly. Now even 210 millimeter cells are available. Multicrystalline cells have given way to single crystal because again charge carrier losses are lower with single crystals, although upfront manufacturing costs are slightly higher. And even PERC, which is the passivated emitter rear contact designs, are available with large format cells, and now half cells are also available. Panels which used to make about 250 watts per panel in 2010 now make about 500 watts from the same sized panel. So, and going forward, of course, ever larger panels were also a trend for some time. That is not going to work out anymore because structural limits, mounting logistics all dictate that large growth in panel size beyond the current level is unlikely. After all this talk about the technology, one should ask, okay, paisa kidhar hai? And the graph here in terms of levelized cost bears out what we just said in terms of the 89% reduction in levelized cost. From about 44 cents per kilowatt hour in 2010, we are now at less than 5 cents per kilowatt hour. Significant improvements have been won across modules, which I just talked about. In addition to the modules improvement, there are also reduction in polysilicon use by about 65% due to more precise wafering and swarf losses being cut down. Silver use is reduced from about 55 milligrams per watt in 2010 to about 13, with targets for even going down as low as 7.5 milligrams per watt. And bifacial share has increased to about 30% of the total market, which again improves efficiencies. Inverters have improved also. Balance of systems cost has improved by maturity in commissioning, low weight racking solutions, and reduced material use. As systems have been built up, capital and O&M costs have also rationalized. The weighted average cost of capital has reduced as projects mature and risk analysis frameworks become more robust. Increasing capacity factors means that the panels are used more, and staging out of O&M and predicting O&M costs has also become better. I know we are running a little short of time, so I'll just try to speed up. Wind is something which has not contributed as much as solar in India. Nevertheless, it is an important technology, and it would be churlish not to at least mention it in passing. Once again, levelized costs have dropped precipitously, both onshore and offshore. Once again, China holds the technological lead, especially in offshore wind, anchoring ever larger wind turbines in ever deeper water off their coast. The trend has been towards bigger and taller turbines. The largest turbines of the world are currently the 4 megawatt nameplate listed capacity of China. The rotor diameters exceed 160 meters. And the predictability of wind conditions by AI related ML softwares has greatly improved the efficiency of the wind turbines, with capacity factors rising from 27 to 37% over the last decade. And as the turbines get bigger, once again, economy of scale comes into force. Across the board, there have been technology improvements. Composite fan blades are now a routine occurrence. Originally, fan blades had a wooden balsa wood core with skinning panels on it. Current sizes, they are entirely composite carbon fiber based. The question of the use of rare earths and neodymium like materials in the motor windings has led to non permanent magnet drives being researched. These are areas that will gain considerable traction going forward. And innovations are moving from the laboratory to the field at a rate that has been unprecedented in the history of energy technology. Of course, by this time, the eagle eyed observer may ask whether solar or wind, which is better? And this brings us to an important paradigm of the energy transition. This is not a question of ideology. Because we are operating with sources of energy with much lower energy density as compared to the fossil fuels, we have to be very careful in utilizing whatever is available very carefully. All renewable energies have zero fuel cost. So even if your installation and maintenance costs are low, but the energy generation is patchy, then levelized costs can go up. Therefore, predicting and understanding whether solar or wind is more reliable in a given geography will ultimately drive levelized cost. So it is truly a philosophy of horses for courses. Before passing, of course, when in my university days, there was a lot of talk about solar concentrators as well as the younger brother of the solar photovoltaic value chain. And indeed, concentrators are now making their presence felt in photovoltaics as well, but those are early days. In the original form, solar concentrators would, like Archimedes burning a ship, concentrate the light of the sun onto a tower where a working fluid would be heated up for running various turbines, etc. Unfortunately, installation costs are high, and although levelized cost has slowly declined, policy support has been lacking, and for storage, hydrogen and batteries seem to be the way to go. However, solar concentrators, in addition to photovoltaics, particularly heterojunction devices, is an interesting area that is growing rapidly. Of course, there will be hard to abate sectors. There are biofuels and energy. As size of biofuel projects have grown, again, cost efficiencies have built in. In countries like India, especially, biofuel costs have decreased substantially. Levelized costs are again below the fossil fuel band for certain cases, particularly if biomaterial can be aggregated efficiently. Now, preempting a question, first generation biofuels utilized food crops. Of course, the amount of land allocated to them was still less than 1%. And going forward, uh, algae based processes and reconstitution of cooking fats and oils will also be a significant area of interest for generating biofeedstock. This slide just covers a brief view of biofuels and CBG. India has gone behind this in a big way. From biogas, biomethane can be used for city biogas distribution. Already methods are put down for removing of the corrosive hydrogen sulfide and the calorific value reducing carbon dioxide. The presence of these guidelines itself suggests that now market participants can put their shoulder behind what technology suits their financial viability, their reliability models, and start moving forward. This is something which was in the research laboratories about 10 years ago. It's already in the field. And in terms of biofuels, the blending of bioethanol and petrol, demand for synthetic aviation fuel is set to grow. Once again, though, biomass sourcing is a problem, and in diesel, blending ethanol becomes a challenge because of the significant density differences. Of course, stabilizing agents are being experimented, and this is a technology which will catch on as time goes forward. Batteries are an important area, and batteries, particularly the boxes marked in red, represent various regions where the renewable energy grids can be supported very effectively. They provide flexibility and reliability. I draw your attention to the green graph on the right side. As renewable energies step in, the variation in power available between peak to trough conditions are going to increase. So battery storage will provide buffers in a flow-based grid. An interesting way to think of it is that in the past, humans have done this with water. Water was highly flow-based. In times of rains, there would be floods. Other times in summer, there would be droughts. So reservoirs of water were created to add buffers to a flow-based system. What we did with water over the entirety of our existence, we are learning to do with electricity in the coming 10 to 15 years. And batteries are a critical part of this entire exercise. We should remember one thing here, and I will start by mentioning that when we talk of electricity, the low energy density of the new sources mean that we have to pick either power density or energy density. There is no one size fits all. Ramming home the point that this is not an ideological transition. The choices here will have to be made very carefully on technology based grounds because that is what will drive economics and eventually de risk the project. There is no one size fits all. Lithium ion batteries have, of course, been the forerunner of battery chemistries. I will not labor the audience by saying that several chemistries are available, but once again, it is a careful compromise between life, discharge, and overall reliability of the battery system. The battery fires which grounded the Boeing 787 early in its career are well known. Battery fires can be quite catastrophic, particularly in the high energy density lithium chemistries. Other than safety, of course, the cost of lithium also drives the search for an alternative. And it's not just lithium. There is significant demand. There is going to be significant demand for copper, nickel, cobalt, and neodymium. So, significant effort into mining, creating new resources for these is underway. At the same time, substitutes are being sought, particularly in sodium ion based architectures. This map of the future chemistries, largely by Romotion, SNE Research, and Bernstein, covers that in the future, ever less energy demanding or ever less cobalt dominated batteries will enter service, and improvements in manufacturing and technology will improve their energy density as well. while in the 2030 timeframe we will start we'll start seeing sodium ion make its way into the market. Energy carriers, green hydrogen and ammonia. This is an important area which I will go through rapidly. Uh, Buffers and catchment tanks are important in water. In the same way, buffers are also important in energy systems. If one has to store a small amount of energy and release it very rapidly, this you could think of as a tank on top of a storage tank in your house or on your building. Lithium ion batteries are perfect for this. However, if you want to store a lot of energy for a long period of time, then it is much better to have one Tansa or a Vaitarna reservoir than an entire farm of hundreds of thousands of Syntex tanks. So depending on on how much energy you want to store versus how rapidly you want to get it out, there is a future for hydrogen as well. Hydrogen and ammonia are the two sides of the coin and they are complementary to electricity. At present, most hydrogen feedstocks are produced from natural gas and oil, by the way. In India, of course, gas is unattractive. Whether we use unabated, as seen on the leftmost graph, or with carbon capture going into the future by the 2030 timeframe, the cost of natural gas, because we need about 4.5 cubic meters of gas for every kilogram of hydrogen produced, that is going to drive and dominate the cost structure for hydrogen. And of course, we are now hearing tales of electrolysis. I'll not go into the depths of this slide. And there are several technologies available. Those who are interested in discussing this, I request you to email me separately for this particular area. What I'm trying to say though is instead of trying to pick winners in the electrolysis or the types of technology, an important point to remember, as we can see, is that it is electricity cost which drives the cost of hydrogen. In America also, we are seeing these trends emerge. And with tax credits, green hydrogen will actually be cheaper than blue and gray hydrogen in the 2026-27 timeframe. Electrolyzer cost reductions, learning rates don't matter as much as electricity cost. So green hydrogen will require dedicated renewable energy capacity, usually solar, which will add on top of the solar requirement for the electricity transition as well. Efficiency begets efficiency. Piping hydrogen is very difficult though. It's a very light gas. It's not dense. You will need a compressor. High strength steel tanks will be required, and these are not normal stainless steel. We would require separate alloys again for piping. These can be expensive because there can be significant embrittlement of the pipes. And when it comes to moving hydrogen energy, we are again looking at a choice between energy density or power density. If you want power density, then one can ship hydrogen directly in a pipe as hydrogen, but only over short distances. If you want to ship it over large distances by cramming as much energy as possible into a smaller volume, you would have to convert it into liquid organic hydrogen carriers and then move it across, where you will lose power density in reconversion losses. This completely agrees with what Ravi was telling a few moments, half an hour ago, sorry, about what the distribution side of the energy paradigm will entail. This is at least as large as putting up the renewable capacities, if not bigger. Of course, as I just mentioned, I'll not go into this. We can use batteries for storage, but not everywhere because they're very expensive. Sodium ion batteries could change it. Reliance Industries, for example, has initiated some work in this area. The last point I come to is variability and smart grids. Smart grids are really required to integrate the renewable energy resources. And a smart grid is a grid, but not as we know it. It is an information highway superimposed on an electrical grid. And unlike a single directional flow of energy or information, a smart grid allows bidirectional flow of energy and information. So it allows real-time power management for real-world flexibility. It requires highly optimized forecasts, real-time prediction, and very short-time reactions. This will require changes to transformers, to inverters, probably the formation of linked inverter islands, so-called grid forming inverters. And smart metering, obviously, to make sure that the trends of energy consumption are captured for predictive modeling to even out transients even before they are created. This is an exciting area, bringing together or at the confluence of energy engineering, systems engineering, and software creation of a kind that we have not seen before in the energy space. Recycling will play an important role as well. At present, we don't think very heavily of this, but as the materials being recycled or used in the energy transition become scarcer and more expensive, and energy costs keep dropping, recycling will become ever more viable, and there'll be significant value extraction. But even this will see a significant change. Till now, we are all aware of the term "bhangar ke bhav bikta hai." Bhangar ke bhav bikta hai is a saying that comes out of the fact that most recycling value chains are mass based. How much mass of material can be recycled? Renewable energy systems will require value dominated recycling procedures. There is no clear path on how to take this forward. As an example, if we take a solar PV panel, by weight it is largely glass, but by value it is silver and crystalline silicon, with glass being significantly smaller on the value front. Before leaving you, here is a significant thought. This is a calculation for the energy payback time. The table on top of the slide represents the energy consumed for preparing 1 square meter of a solar photovoltaic. And the table at the bottom, in an Indian case, assuming 6 kilowatt hours per meter squared per day and 300 days of sun, calculates what is the energy output of the panel. Clearly, the panel will be able to make back its energy input in a little over 3 years at this point, assuming a 17% module efficiency. If this efficiency were 23%, that payback period will drop to 2 years and to under 1.5 years if it were close to 29%. Solar PV capacity, of course, installed is doubled every 3.5 years, and significant growth is continuing. Um, Efficiency increases with production efficiency will also reduce the input energy cost. There will be a time when the energy payback period will be smaller than the doubling time of renewable energies. We are getting very close to that already. At which point the renewable energy generated by these resources will start powering the construction of new renewable energy resources, answering one of the biggest criticisms everyone has of a renewable energy transition, that it is powered by fossil energy. Uh, just as a child born to moderate circumstances, then growing at initially on the nurture of his parents or her parents, and eventually rising to levels their parents can never reach, this transition will take energy from conventional fossil fuels initially, reach scale, and eventually reach levels that fossil energy could never reach without destroying the planet. So, renewable energy is at the alignment of technology, economics, and policy. Smart grids, IoT, SaaS, all of these will play a role. This is not an ideology driven transition. Innovations will add value. Battery, hydrogen, and ammonia will all be used. And there can be disruption of conventional vertically integrated energy provider and grid players, the way conventional telephone companies were destroyed when mobile based and broadband based internet plus data started entering the market. This will be a transition driven by IP holders, especially. Smart grid, IoT, and application development companies will also benefit. The energy transition is likely to drive a commodity super cycle and drive a significant impetus into recycling based value chains. Across the board, there will be a large demand for industrial gases and gas handling infrastructure in general. And smart manufacturing will play a significant role in improving efficiencies. We are at the cusp of a transition in many areas that has never been seen before since the Industrial Revolution, happening at a rate that is unprecedented in human history. And with that, I reach the end of my presentation, and it is my pleasure to hand over to Varun. Sorry for overrunning my time a little bit. Thank you.